Hello, second graders. I hope you guys are doing well. Greetings to you from my living room. I hope you got out in the sunshine these past few days, but I will say I definitely miss you and miss our time in the library, our class time and recess and lunch. So what I would like to do is to read you guys aloud a book, and I'm going to read a chapter at a time. And I'm going to start with a book that I like to read to second graders anyway, because it's a classic story. It's been around for a long time. Your brothers and sisters should have read it. Your parents will have read it. Your grandparents will know it. It's one of those stories that what we call cultural literacy, like everyone in our culture knows of this story. So it's an important piece of work. It's also a great time to read it because, as you'll see in chapter 1, the way that these people are living is similar to what we're going through right now with our shelter in place. So we can talk about that a little bit at the end of the chapter. You can post your comments on Google Classroom too. And also, it's the beginning of a series. So there's lots of books in this series, and they're all just as good as this one. And it's a great series for you to start at this point, and you can read these books for the next few years. So the title of the book is Little House in the Big Woods. It's by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Now, you may remember me reading you guys some of the picture books in like kindergarten and first grade about this family that lived in a log cabin in the big woods. And this is the first chapter book in the series. One thing I think is interesting is when you look at the cover, you see this family, and the main picture, the main focus of the picture on the front is the girl holding the doll. And this looks like such a, nice little picture of a girl and her doll. But what you'll find out right away as we start reading is that this is a story of a family who are pioneers, and they are living out in the woods. So they're dealing with things like wild animals. They have to get their food all by themselves. They have to hunt. They have to grow their food. They are dealing with Native Americans. They're dealing with nature and any kind of storm or snow or things that comes their way. So even though it looks like it may not be that appealing to you just by looking at the cover, it is a very exciting story, as we're going to find out right away in chapter 1. So I'm going to read starting now, and if you have this book at home, you can read along with me. I will say there's one part of chapter 1 that I am going to skip, though. So if you're reading at home, you'll notice that I'm going to skip a part. Because in chapter 1, they are going to kill their pig so they can eat it and make it into meat and cheese and other things, sausage and things like that for them to eat. But I just don't want to upset anyone. It goes into a little bit of detail that I don't think we need to hear. But if you want to find out about it, you're welcome to look at this chapter on your own. But if you're reading along with me, you'll notice that I am going to skip that part. Okay, so chapter 1. Once upon a time, 60 years ago, a little girl lived in the big woods of Wisconsin in a little gray house made of logs. The great dark trees of the big woods stood all around the house, and beyond them were other trees, and beyond them were more trees. As far as a man could go to the north in a day, or a week, or a whole month, there was nothing but woods. There were no houses. There were no roads. There were no people. There were only trees and the wild animals who had their homes among them. Wolves lived in the big woods, and bears, and huge wild cats. Muskrats and mink and otters lived by the streams. Foxes had dens in the hills, and deer roamed everywhere. To the east of the little log house and to the west, there were miles upon miles of trees, and only a few little log houses scattered far apart on the edge of the big woods. So far as the little girl could see, there was only the one little house where she lived with her father and her mother, her sister Mary, and her baby sister Carrie. A wagon track ran before the house, twisting and turning out of sight in the woods where the wild animals lived. But the little girl did not know where it went, nor what might be at the end of it. The little girl was named Laura, and she called her father Pa and her mother Ma. In those days, and in that place, children did not say father or mother, nor mama or papa, as they do now. And as we do now, you guys say mom and dad. At night, when Laura lay awake in the trundle bed, she listened, and she could not hear anything at all but the sound of the trees whispering together. Sometimes, far away in the night, a wolf howled. Then he came nearer and howled again. It was a scary sound. Laura knew that the wolves would eat little girls, but she was safe inside the solid log walls. Her father's gun hung over the door, and good old Jack, their bulldog, lay on guard before it. Her father would say, "Go to sleep, Laura. Jack won't let the wolves in." So Laura snuggled under the covers of the trundle bed, close beside Mary, and went to sleep. One night, her father picked her up out of bed and carried her to the window so that she might see the wolves. There were 2 of them sitting in front of the house. They looked like shaggy dogs. They pointed their noses up at the big, bright moon and howled. Jack paced up and down before the door, growling. The hair stood up along his back, and he showed his sharp, fierce teeth to the wolves. They howled, but they could not get in. The house was a comfortable house. Upstairs, there was a large attic, pleasant to play in when the rain drummed on the roof. Downstairs was the small bedroom and the big room. The bedroom had a window that closed with a wooden shutter. The big room had 2 windows with glass in the panes, and it had 2 doors, a front door and a back door. All around the house was a crooked rail fence to keep the bears and the deer away. In the yard in the front of the house, there were 2 big, beautiful oak trees. Every morning, as soon as she was awake, Laura ran to look out the window. And one morning, she saw in each of the big trees a dead deer hanging from a branch. Pa had shot the deer the day before, and Laura had been asleep when he brought them home at night and hung them high in the trees so that the wolves would not get the meat. That day, Pa and Ma and Laura and Mary had fresh venison for dinner. It was so good that Laura wished they could eat it all. But most of the meat must be salted and smoked and packed away to be eaten in the winter. For winter was coming. The days were shorter, the frost crawled up the window panes at night, and soon the snow would come. Then the log house would be almost buried in snow drifts, and the lake and the streams would freeze. In the bitter cold weather, Pa could not be sure of finding any wild game to shoot for meat. The bears would be hidden away in their dens where they slept soundly all winter long. The squirrels would be curled in their nests in hollow trees with their furry little tails wrapped snugly around their noses. The deer and the rabbits would be shy and swift. Even if Pa could get a deer, it would be poor and thin, not fat and plump as the deer are in the fall. Pa might hunt alone all day in the bitter cold in the big woods covered with snow and come home at night with nothing for Ma and Mary and Laura to eat. So, as much food as possible must be stored away in the little house before the winter came. Pa skinned the deer carefully and salted and stretched the hides, for he would make soft leather of them. Then he cut up the meat and sprinkled salt over the pieces as he laid them on a board. Standing on end in the yard was a tall length cut from the trunk of a big hollow tree. Pa had driven nails inside as far as he could reach from each end. Then he stood it up and put a little roof over the top and cut a little door on one side near the bottom. On the piece that he cut out, he fastened little leather hinges, and then he fitted it into place, and that was the door with the bark still on it. I'm going to show you a picture of what Pa was making. This is what he was making. And it's a hollow log with a door and a roof on it, and this is where they are going to smoke their meat. And that way it lasts. Okay. After the deer meat had been salted several days, Pa cut a hole near the end of each piece and put a string through it. Laura watched him do this, and she watched him hang the meat on the nails in the hollow log. He reached up through the little door and hung the meat on the nails as far as he could reach. Then he put a ladder against the log, climbed to the top, moved the roof to one side, and reached down inside to hang the meat on the nails. Then Pa put the roof back again, climbed down the ladder, and said to Laura, "Run over to the chopping block and fetch me some of those green hickory chips. New, clean, white ones." So Laura ran to the block where Pa chopped wood and filled her apron with fresh, sweet-smelling chips. And here's a picture of her running back and forth, getting the chips and bringing them to Pa in her apron. Just inside the little door in the hollow log, Pa had built a fire of tiny bits of bark and moss, and he laid some of the chips on it very carefully. Instead of burning quickly, the green chips smoldered and filled the hollow log with thick, choking smoke. Pa shut the door, and a little smoke squeezed through the crack and around it, and a little smoke came out through the roof, but most of it was shut with meat. "There's nothing better than good hickory smoke," Pa said. "That will make good venison, and we can keep it anywhere in any weather." Then he took his gun, and slinging his axe over his shoulder, he went away to the clearing to cut down some more trees. Laura and Ma watched the fire for several days. So that's Ma over there by the fire. When the smoke stopped coming through the cracks, Laura would bring more hickory chips, and Ma would put them on the fire under the meat. All the time, there was a little smell of smoke in the yard, and when the door was opened, a thick, smoky meat smell came out. At last, Pa said the venison had smoked long enough. Then he let the fire go out, and Pa took all the strips and pieces of meat out of the hollow tree. Ma wrapped each piece neatly in paper and hung them in the attic where they would keep dry. One morning, Pa went away before daylight with the horses and the wagon, and that night he came home with a wagon load of fish. The big wagon box was piled high, and some of the fish were as big as Laura. Pa had gone to Lake Pepin and caught these fish with a net. Ma cut large slices of flaky white fish without any bits of bone in it for Laura and Mary. They all feasted on the good fresh fish. All they did not eat fresh was salted down in barrels then and kept for the winter. Pa owned a pig. It ran wild in the big woods, living on acorns and nuts and roots. Now he caught it and put it in a pen made of logs to fatten it up. Soon he would kill that too. Once in the middle of the night, Laura woke up and heard the pig squealing. Pa jumped out of bed and snatched his gun from the wall and ran outdoors. Then Laura heard the gun go off once, twice. When Pa came back, he told what had happened. He had seen a big black bear standing beside the pig pen. The bear was reaching into the pig pen, trying to grab the pig, and the pig was running around squealing. When Pa saw this through the starlight, he fired quickly, but the light was so dim, and in his hurry, he missed the bear. The bear ran away into the woods and was not hurt at all. Laura was sorry that Pa did not get the bear. She liked bear meat very much. Pa was sorry too, but he said, "Anyway, I saved the bacon." The garden behind the little house had been growing all summer. It was so near the house that the deer could not jump the fence and eat the vegetables in the daytime, and at night Jack kept them away. Sometimes in the morning, there were little hoof prints alongside the carrots and cabbages, but Jack's tracks were there too, and the deer must have jumped right out again. Now the potatoes and carrots and beets and turnips and cabbages were all gathered and stored in the cellar, for the freezing nights had come. Onions were made into long ropes, braided together by their tops, and then they were hung in the attic besides the wreaths of red peppers strung on threads. The pumpkins and the squashes were piled in orange and yellow and green heaps in the attic corners. The barrels of salted fish were in the pantry, and the yellow cheese were stacked on the pantry shelves. Then one day, Uncle Henry came riding out of the big woods. He had come to help Pa with the pig. Okay, this is the part I'm going to skip. The only thing I'm going to tell you that's really interesting is that they do take the pig's bladder and they blow it up and tie a string to it. And it becomes a toy for the girls to play with. And it says, Pa made the bladder into a ball. He tied the end tight with a string and gave it to Laura and Mary to play with. They could throw it up in the air and they could spat it back and forth with their hands. Or it would bounce along the ground and they could kick it. But even better than playing with the balloon was playing with the pig's tail. Okay, so now I'm going to skip that part. I'm going to go on to how now they were pretty much ready for the winter. And here's a picture of Laura and Mary. They're going to talk about this next. They're up in the attic, and there's, they've each got a doll in their hand. And there's all the food, like, stored and hanging. And they're sitting on top of pumpkins and squash. And it says, the little house was fairly bursting with good food stored away for the long winter. The pantry and the shed and the cellar were all full. And so was the attic. Laura and Mary must play in the house now, for it was cold outdoors and the brown leaves were all falling from the trees. The fire in the cook stove never went out. At night, Pa banked it with ashes to keep the coals alive until the morning. The attic was a lovely place to play. The large round colored pumpkins made beautiful chairs and tables. The red peppers and the onions dangled overhead. The ham and the venison hung in its paper wrappings, and all the bunches of dried herbs, the spicy herbs for cooking and the bitter herbs for medicine, gave the place a dusty, spicy smell. Often the wind howled outside with a cold and lonesome sound. But in the attic, Laura and Mary played house with the squashes and the pumpkins, and everything was snug and cozy. Mary was bigger than Laura, and she had a rag doll named Nettie. Laura only had a corncob doll wrapped in a handkerchief, but it was a good doll. It was named Susan. It wasn't Susan's fault that she was only a corncob. Sometimes Mary let Laura hold Nettie, but she only did it when Susan couldn't see. So Susan, she doesn't want to hurt her own doll's feelings. So when her doll's not looking, she'll hold her sister's doll. The best of times were at night. After supper, Pa brought his traps in from the shed to grease them by the fire. He rubbed them bright and greased the hinges of the jaws and the springs of the pans with a feather dipped in bear's grease. There were small traps and middle-sized traps and great big bear traps with teeth in their jaws that Pa said would break a man's leg if it got shut in it. Here's a picture of Pa with his traps. And he's greasing them and waxing them, and then there's Laura watching him. When Pa greased the traps, while he greased the traps, Pa told Laura and Mary little jokes and stories, and afterwards he would play his fiddle. The doors and the windows were tightly shut, and the cracks of the window frames were stuffed with cloth to keep the cold out. But Black Susan the cat came and went as she pleased day and night through the swinging door of the cat hole in the bottom of their front door. She always went very quickly so the door would not catch her tail when it fell shut. One night when Pa was greasing the traps, he watched Black Susan come and go, and he said, "There once was a man who had 2 cats, a big cat and a little cat." Laura and Mary ran to kneel on his knees to hear the rest of it. "He had 2 cats," Pa repeated, "a big cat and a little cat. So he made a big cat hole in his door for the big cat, and he made a little cat hole in his door for the little cat." There Pa stopped. "But why couldn't the little cat," Mary began. "Because the big cat wouldn't let it," Laura interrupted. "Laura," said Pa, "that is very rude. You must never interrupt." "But I see," he said, "that either of you has more sense than the man who cut the 2 cat holes in his door." Then Pa laid away the traps, and he took his fiddle out of its box, and he began to play. That was the best times of all. So that's the end of chapter 1. as I said, it does sort of remind me a little bit of these times that we're in right now with shelter in place, because it's too cold now for them to play outside, so they have to entertain themselves in their house. And you can see they use their imagination and go up in the attic and play house, and they play with dolls, and one's not even a doll, it's just a piece of corn on the cob. So they really did have to use their imagination, and I hope you guys are finding that you are coming up with some creative games to play too. And also, they're storing up on their food, and they're making sure they have plenty of food. And you may have been hearing and reading about how people now also are doing the same thing, and trying to make sure they have enough food. And so it's a little bit similar in that way. It reminded me of what we're kind of going through right now. Okay, chapter 2 I'll read next time, and chapter 2 is called Winter Days and Winter Nights. And you can see there's a bear walking away. So I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. And you can post your comments, as I said, on our Google Classroom, and we will continue with the story. Okay, as I said, I missed you guys all, and I hope you're doing well. Look in your house and see if you have these books on your shelves. And I'll chat with you on Google Classroom. Miss you. Bye.